Hey everyone, welcome. Today we have Chelsie Gillum with us. Chelsie recently did a workshop for us around navigating the IEP. It's been quite a popular workshop. It's very comprehensive. I know for me, even with a 14-year-old going into 8th grade, it's one that I'm using, even though we've been on an IEP since my daughter's been in kindergarten. So there's a lot of really good, useful information in it, whether you're just getting started out with an IEP or whether you are a more advanced, experienced IEP goer like myself. So welcome, Chelsie. Thank you so much. Chelsie and I met at the Tacoma Special Education PTA, where we worked together on the board. She did a lot of great speaking for us. And so I immediately thought of her when I wanted to start to put together this IEP workshop. So Chelsie, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Chelsie, let's kick things off by having you tell us a little bit about yourself. I'd like to know, who are you? What's your background? And how did you end up in this line of work?
Yeah, so I'm Chelsie Gillum. I'll start with that. Yeah, I came, so starting with school, I went to the University of Washington, and first I studied creative writing, because, live your dreams.
Yeah.
And I started working at a writing center there, working as a tutor, and then I eventually kind of, took it over and all of that. And I found myself, really gravitating towards working with students who had learning differences, who were kind of navigating disability resources and stuff on campus. And it was really funny because so I have a lot of personal experience with disability. My younger brother is significantly impacted by multiple disabilities as a result of malpractice when he was very young. And so, I kind of grew up always saying, like, I'm not, going to do special education. I'm not going to do that stuff because I saw a lot of the frustrations that my family experienced. And also because my brother at different times in his life has been medically fragile. I also knew a lot of medically fragile kids growing up, and I knew a lot of them for their whole lifetimes, and then they passed. And so I just had that, like, a really big wall, I think, like, about what special education like would mean to me. And so people would ask me, and I'd be like, oh no, that's not it. But so in this writing center, working with these students and thinking, like, I think I'm just fighting nature here. And so I started volunteering then after that at my brother's school. Tried to not be in his program because he'd see me and be like, take me home. So, but I started volunteering once a week, and I did it for a year and haven't looked back. So I went back, became a double dog at UW, and did my master's in with a focus on low incidence disabilities. Also did all the coursework to be a board certified behavior analyst, but that test is expensive. And so I did not do that. I knew I wanted to be a teacher anyway. So then I kind of bounced around, subbed, wanted to find, like, my, the best fit for me and everything. I'd been a para throughout grad school and stuff in a couple different places. And then, so I've taught mostly in secondary. I've also been the fancy thing we call a teacher on special assignment, which is basically a way of saying admin level work, but cert level pay. And so I was basically a district admin, but again, not officially, but did all the same stuff. And then, and I've also worked for the state in the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. So I kind of have that I've got the personal experience that I bring with me, which I think gives me really good context for working with families and everything. But then I have professional and experiences as well. So.
You do. I think one of my favorite things about you, and I've said this multiple times, is I think you're able to both lead with your intelligence, knowledge, and background, but also with your heart. And in addition to being really great with students, helping parents to feel like they're being supported as well. Because at the end of the day, it's all about the student, but it has to be sort of a collaborative effort. So I think you do a really nice job of that.
Thank you. It's funny. I always had colleagues, when I was teaching, that would say, like, oh, this job is great, but, like, I just have such a hard time with the parents. And I always felt like It's just kind of funny because like I don't like I don't really have a hard time with the parents. And I think, there were times where I was worried like, oh, maybe that sounds like arrogant or something. But where I was coming from was just always a place of empathy. And if I'm not, understanding a person's like experience, I'm going to seek to learn about their experience. And I think I also just always have assumed that parents want the best for their children. That's just kind of part of being parents. And if you kind of look at any situation, even if there's like big feelings and whatnot in those situations, if you assume that kind of intentionality, you can usually get to, whatever the actual core of the issue is. And folks, once they know that you're on their side, usually then want to play, want to play ball, play,
Play ball.
whatever, play ball. I don't know. I'm not a sports person. I should just
Okay.
steer clear of
Yeah.
those metaphors. So, yeah.
Well, okay. So one of the things I was thinking about is that, I mean, teachers are typically there for students, right? I mean, they are always there for students. At least, they start out that way. It's always the best of intentions. One of the things I think parents don't understand is that is their power in this in this whole school IEP process, and that they really can step up and be their child's advocate. It's so confusing. And I know even when I first started out, it was kind of like I was looking to someone else to sort of tell me what to do. And we got really lucky in the second school district Morgan was in that they were super proactive and really helpful. And that's here in Tacoma. That we had a school before that it wasn't that way. And I just sort of let things happen. You know what I mean? And so it's going to be different no matter what school district you're in. And hopefully you end up in one that you get to work with people like yourself and some of the people we've gotten to work with. But as a parent, really understanding your power and role in the process, I think is really important, because that's ultimately, everyone working together is ultimately how your student gets the best outcome.
Right.
Yeah. So, okay, let's get into some of these questions. So I would like to know what the single most important piece of advice that you can give to families when it comes to navigating the IEP.
Well, I think what you were just saying is kind of honestly like the perfect segue to that. Really, it crystallizes to speak up. If you, and you can kind of apply that to, whatever the situation, whatever the feeling is. If you're not sure what's going on, ask. If you don't like what's going on, or you're suspicious that you might not like it, if you understood it better, speak up, ask. If things are going well and you are really appreciating what the team is doing, say so. I mean, that's, to the point. I think I do a pretty good job of kind of understanding both sides and weighing what everybody's feelings are and everything. But I have to tell you, as an educator, you often don't hear good things. You hear, I mean, from top down, right? You hear more and more of what you need to be doing. It's never taking anything else away. It's just you need to also do all of these other things and figure that out. And then, with families, like oftentimes if you're serving so many families, you're just kind of trying to like get through and make sure things are legal and make sure like you're meeting all of your deadlines and all of that. So, saying if you like something, if you want to celebrate something with the team, I feel like isn't something that happens enough. I know I tried to make that happen as a teacher, where I made sure that when I was contacting families, at least half of the time, I aimed for more, but at least half of the time it was for good things, like that I wasn't just calling home to say, hey, such and such thing we need to figure out happened, because I obviously had like to do a lot of those phone calls and whatnot. But I had one student in particular I can think of who had come in with quite the rap sheet and had some really, I'm just going to say it because I can, silly goals about, she will be inside the classroom and things like that. And I was receiving her as a high schooler and I was like, So, but anyway, I could see, even without seeing, the parents, because I hadn't yet met her parents, I just was receiving her as a student. And I, looking through her IEP, and I just can see she's got stuff, and they're going to be expecting to hear from me, right, about all the things that she's doing wrong and all the ways she's being defiant, I think is how she was described in her IEP and whatnot. So I just made a point of it. I just decided, I'm not going to communicate with them at all about anything negative for the first month, that unless, crisis, safety stuff. But other than that, I'm just going to communicate home about like when she is doing the thing, even if it's really small, and they were very small wins at the beginning. but anyway, the whole point of that story, it went very well. Her family, when they met me, was very confused at first because they had a lot of expectations about what it was going to be like. She had her struggles, but she grew so much. And even in the course of her freshman year, we made it past the goal of being inside the classroom. But again, going back to your question, my point is that communication, whether it's just as simple of, I don't understand what the team is talking about, please, speak it to me in non-special education ease, or, I have concerns about what's going on. Like, please communicate those as much as you can, as often as you can, and as much as it takes for people to hear you.
I love all of that. As a parent who has received a lot of emails home, especially when my daughter was quite young, it was never congratulatory, and it was a little taxing sometimes. And I also think that perception is reality or becomes reality.
Yep.
So the more you can speak that goodness out into the world, it really does come back to you. So I imagine the two made a really positive impact on that child and their family as well.
I certainly like to think so. And I think, we had some really lovely conversations, me and her dad in particular, because I think he'd been kind of the heavy, in her life up to that point. And so I think even she was kind of confused at first when we had, her first IEP meeting, and I was just saying all the things that she was doing and all of the, all of that. She kind of looked at me and I was like, yeah, this is how this is going to go. So step up,
I love it. So what do you say to parents who just feel like their child isn't getting the support that they need at school?
Yeah. So a couple different, avenues. I mean, it kind of goes back to what I was just talking about, starting with communication, starting, to seek, especially if you feel like the person that you're talking to kind of isn't hearing you, isn't seeing you, maybe you don't feel like they're making time for you. The first thing I would do is try to talk to someone else, So obviously this varies a ton depending on what your students or your child's specific situation is, right? Like if they're in a gen ed fourth grade, like most of the time, and then only have like pull-out services or something. So let's say, you're not making headway with the gen ed teacher, I would try to talk to the person, then the special ed teacher who perhaps is their case manager, and try to go that way, and vice versa. If you feel like you're not making headway with their case manager who's doing their, resource services or whatever, then try to go to the gen ed teacher. And if you don't feel like you're making headway with them, try to then say, okay, who is the school counselor, right? If they're in an elementary school, or who is their assigned counselor if they're in like a secondary setting. Just trying to like see who you can kind of get to be like, or make you feel like you're on a team together, right? And hopefully like you said before, folks get into education with the best of intentions. You should be able to find someone who's going to care and who isn't like too jaded or whatever to receive what it is you're concerned about. You can ask to schedule an observation too. If you're, different schools have different policies around this. So I don't want to make like a blanket statement and say like, yeah, you'll just be able to walk in on Tuesday, but that is something that if you have like specific concerns, you can ask to like come see how things are going. They are public schools, right? Also, I think, if you've got, a specific concern, that also can sometimes be easier to speak to rather than saying like, I just don't like how this program is going or whatever. Let's say, you're specifically concerned about they're not making any progress in reading or something. Yes. So if you can communicate that to the team, that's something that's then kind of easier to say, okay, what are the interventions we're using right now around this? And then let's set up a schedule to kind of review like, okay, we're going to try, this particular curriculum to work on their decoding skills. And, if we're going to measure again in a month, and then if it's not, if we haven't seen that, we're going to reconvene then as a team. Or if we have seen like really great growth, then we're going to, send out an email to the team and say, it's going well, we're going to keep on keeping on kind of thing. But if there's a behavioral concern that you have, right, that, something's going on like in class, same thing, then like, okay, what are we going to do to support, my daughter? What are we going to try? And when are we going to reconvene to see if it's going well or not? I think that's often easier for teams to kind of wrap their heads around, and it gives everybody then kind of more of a quantitative approach versus just the qualitative, like, things are good or bad, right? It's a like, are we making progress or are we not? That I think that can be a lot easier for teams to kind of measure and then feel grounded in, right? To make decisions. And then, as always, is the advice, which if you've been in special education for even like 2 seconds, I hope someone has said this to you, but if not, I'm saying it now. Document everything. Your communication, right? Like even if you've had, I recommend if you've had, an in-person conversation with the teacher, phone call conversation with the teacher, which are great, and please have those, then just send an email saying like, hey, just recapping like what we talked about today. Was so great to see you. Thanks for talking to me. And really glad that we established we're going to meet in a month or something, or we're going to check in a week, or, whatever it is. And just so that you kind of have that paper trail behind you.
That's great. So do you think, does this advice, does it apply to families who are both on an IEP already and who are not in an IEP, but are just, starting to go through the process of recognizing their child might need more supports?
Yeah.
How would those differ, or would they?
Yeah, I mean, I would say really the only difference that I can think of off the top of my head is just that if you're not on an IEP, then you're not going to have like a special ed teacher who's like already serving, right, your student. But that doesn't mean you can't speak to a special ed teacher at the school, right? Just because they're not, your student's case manager or yet, right? Or they're not serving your student yet. I would really encourage you, if you're in this situation where you're not on an IEP yet and you're wondering if that's possibly necessary, you got to go through the school psych or school psychologist. So and because they're ultimately going to be the person who spearheads the whole evaluation process and everything. But, oftentimes as a parent, if you've never had a student in special ed, you're not going to know who the school psych is yet. You won't have met them, right? And so just asking, the gen ed teacher that your child is seeing at the time, right, or whose class they're in at the time, just asking them to put you in contact with the psych so that you can talk to them. And I think that can be a good way to get a conversation going, because oftentimes, like in especially like primary and those early grades where we first kind of start seeing things, it can be brought up by anybody on the team, right? But anybody who's seeing a child. So hopefully, right, a gen ed teacher would be seeing like some of the same things that the parent is seeing, but you don't know that. And so, bringing in the psych and saying like, I've got these things, could you go in the classroom and like check out what's going on? That's something they can do too, to just even have a casual, not yet in the formal process, right? Like conversation and determination if they think they should move forward with evaluation. But I think that's kind of the only difference. I mean, whether you're on an IEP or not, other than that, finding somebody to communicate, finding with, and someone to connect with. And again, even if they're not receiving special ed services, let's say same thing, you're concerned about their reading and they're just in, their third grade class, you can still have that same plan with the gen ed teacher and saying, okay, what are you going to do? What, tier 2, to use like education speak, sorry, intervention are you going to use? And how are we going to decide if that's sufficient, and when will we make that determination, and what are we going to do if it's not, so, because they might want to try some things, first, if they might be sharing your concerns, but they might have some ideas about like what they're going to put in place, or they might already be on your same page and have just kind of been waiting to hear from you. Who knows, so.
Yeah, it is funny that you say that, because I think before we got on an IEP in my daughter's first year of kindergarten, that was the year we got an email home every day about, behavior. And at the end of the year, I just thought I had this like total problem child on my hands. I just didn't have any concept of any of this at that time, right? And the teacher kind of like, it was the end of the year and we were talking about, do we have a redo kindergarten again, or what's going on? And so it was just like this like heavy hint that like, well, maybe it's more wink, wink, one of those things. And I was like, fortunately I was able to put, connect those dots. And I ended up going to an external doctor to then diagnose and like write a letter to the school. So I think to your point, you're going to have, and the teacher was wonderful. Don't get me wrong. I don't think there was any ill intent. I have no idea what her parameters were for what she felt like she could say or couldn't say to us. But I think parents like go, that's an example, like parents go to bat. And if you're not making the headway at the school, it's okay to go talk to an external resource who can, like
Totally.
I think I think he was a psychiatrist. He like wrote like this letter that was like, she needs this, this, and this, and then got it to the school. And then all of a sudden it kicked off the whole IEP process, which was awesome.
Right.
A couple ways to do that, I guess.
Well, and I think, I mean, granted, I'm completely speculating here. I don't know this teacher. I don't, wasn't there for this situation. But I do think a lot of teachers worry about, if bringing certain, even if they do have their own concerns, there's still so much stigma around, the possibility of disability and like, what does that mean? And, oh God, will this be with them for the rest of their lives? And, so I think there is a certain amount of trepidation just in educators in general, where they're afraid sometimes to bring forward because they don't want, and they also don't want families to think that they're coming forward saying, hey, I see some deficiencies in your child, right?
Totally.
Because that's versus, right? Because I know some families, right, reasonably so, that's like what they're hearing when what a team is wanting to communicate, right, is like, hey, I see some areas that your child could really benefit from some services and to help them reach their potential, to help them reach towards the things we know they're capable of, right? But there's just, and that's just, the society that we're living in still, right?
Well,
So
totally.
so I think, just it could be that, it could have been 1,000 other things, but in general, like that does go on. And so, if you're a parent who's wondering things, just speak your wonders out loud. It goes back to the whole like speak up advice. Like if you're saying like, hey, and you don't have to know, like all the different, you don't have to know the difference between ADD or ADHD. Like you don't have to know those things. You can just say, hey, I'm noticing my child is like experiencing these things. Is this typical? Is this something, is this just in the normal, like, or normal with big scare quotes, right? Is this like something we would anticipate for my second grader or whatever? Or is this kind of atypical? Is this not, is this not what we would expect in this situation or whatever? Because the other thing is, I mean, and I say this as a person who's new to the parenting game, with my 3.5-year-old and 1-year-old, we only know the kids that we have, right? I've only parented up to that age. I have no idea who they're going to be when they're, like, it's just, I'm here for the ride. I don't know like what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
And so just asking, the team that's around you, right. And saying like, hey, little context here. Is this what my, what this looks like? So,
Totally.
I think that's good too.
Well, and I can only imagine the challenge of the teacher, and I will not go on a diatribe about this, but you and I have discussed this before. Just the pressures of society that your child has to be perfect and look a certain way. And it's like, those are just rules. Those are just made up rules. Like who cares if your 5-year-old isn't, they don't need to be reading a novel. If they are, great. You know what I mean? But there's just so much pressure around, I need to decide what I'm going to do for a living by age 7 or whatever. Right. And so it is hard, I guess, to hear that your child might need extra supports. But I would say, your kids are your kids. They are their own humans, and they are going to be spectacular in some areas, and they are going to be challenged in others, just like every other person on the planet. And I think we're just there to accept them and help them through it in the best way we know how. So hopefully with minimal trauma. Okay. So one last question for you today. Tell us, so you were talking to me a little bit about a memorable IEP outcome. So I'd love for you to share that story. Your most memorable IEP outcome.
My most memorable one. That's a lot. That's harder.
One of your most memorable. We don't have to. Okay. We don't have to get. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So one that I can think of, I had a student who came to me as a sophomore. So she had been actually at the school that I ended up teaching, or one of the schools I ended up teaching at. She'd been there the year before. And to put it as diplomatically as I can, they just weren't really set up to serve her. They, I will say, did their best, I suppose. But I think that year makes me chuckle a little bit with the whole, with as minimal trauma as possible. I don't think that year was great for anybody. I don't think it was great for her teacher. I don't think it was great for admin. I think it was just kind of a struggle. So anyway, I show up and my program gets established and all of that, and everybody's like, great, take her, kind of thing. And I am, yes, I'm happy, and I was happy to take her, and everything was great. But anyway, so she, I was speaking with her previous case manager. They were again telling me a lot of things that she was not able to do. That was kind of what they led with, in letting me get to know this young woman. So I had a really, really long list of things she didn't know how to do, and a pretty short list of things she did know how to do. And so I just kind of thought of this as like, all right, blank slate. Let's just figure it out. I'm going to do every single assessment. We're going to try every single, and we're just going to see. We're going to be thorough. And it was true. She did not know how to read. Caveat. She knew how to do lots of things. I want to be very clear about that. The piece that was true is that she was at that point a non-reader. So I think she could recognize her name. I think that's something she was able to do, just her first name. And that was kind of it in terms of reading skills. And so me being the stubborn person that I am, I was like, great, she's going to know how to read. So which not everybody thinks to do at high school. There's a lot of folks around who would say that's too late, that folks can't learn to read at that point. But I remember by the time we had her IEP, which was later in the year, I'd learned a lot about her family. She was the oldest of, I'm pretty sure, 5. I think her mom had just had a baby. She was not the only one in her family with some significant needs. I know another of her sister had some needs as well. They were an English language learning family, spoke multiple languages in the house, and living in like a very, very small house with a big family. And I remember, coming to her IEP and having her mom get there, and her mom was just kind of very quiet, in the beginning. And I think kind of just anticipating and taking things in and just kind of being present for it. I think that was also kind of culturally what she expected. I think she was assuming that I was kind of just going to give her a laundry list of everything her child still wasn't able to do. And we were just kind of leave it at that. But at that point, she had learned 100 sight words, which means that she could, read them, like on site, read them. She had learned to read them by memorizing them, which also meant that she was reading short books. I had her read a short book to her mom, and she was able to write her full name. She was learning to write her full address. She, like all of her personal information, all of that. She was doing a lot more than the nothing that she had been doing the previous year. I was telling her mom how, she was going to all her classes on her own, because again, this was in high school. Whereas previously, like, she didn't really have classes, let's be honest. But and she was going to electives. So she was also getting out into the general education setting and not being served the way that she was before. And it was really just this miraculous moment, I think, where her mom just kind of, looked at me and and kind of just, was like, again, still kind of taking it all in. And she was like, okay. Like there wasn't like a huge, pouring out of like all of these like different thoughts and feelings and everything, but we had this just fundamental moment of understanding, where there was just a shift in what we were going to expect from now on. And we were going to expect that she was going to go to classes and that she was going to take different classes, and which was not even remotely in anybody's mind, like previously, right? Like she went on to do dance performances, and on stage, and with the whole school's like big, dance performances and stuff that like we sold tickets to and everything. And it was just I can't really describe it adequately. It was just kind of a moment where it was like, everything's going to change from now, and it did. So.
Very cool. So what do you think helped create the shift for that girl? Is it new goals that were input into the IEP? Is it a new new expectations? Is it that you gave her hands-on support and had that new perception of what she could do? Like, what helped her turn that corner, do you think?
I think, from what I could tell, in the previous year, I think the folks that were working with her felt very overwhelmed by her kind of emotional needs. I think, I mean, the way she was described to me is like she cries all the time,
Okay.
just whatever. So, and she was very anxious. She definitely presented with a lot of anxiety, and so my thought is that I'm a special education teacher. She qualifies in social emotional skills. Like, it's my job to provide specially designed instruction in social emotional skills so that she can access the rest of her life. And so I did a lot of intensive social emotional instruction with her. We did lots of social stories, lots of like talking about like when I feel overwhelmed, or when I feel, this way, what can I do? Like those things. And then we also just did a lot of like graduated guidance where basically, we had the goal of like, we know she's capable of going to classes by herself, but right now she doesn't feel like she's capable of doing it. So we just literally, when I say we, I mean me and my team of amazing paraeducators that made my job possible. We would just take her 75% of the way to class, and then the next week we took her 50% of the way to class. And then the week after that, 25% of the way. And then we were done. And then she absolutely refused to have us go with her anywhere. So I think she was like, all right, now that I'm done with you, you're embarrassing. So just,
Right. Exactly.
and we just kind of applied that same methodology to lots of things. Like, we just kind of said, we know we can get there. So what does it look like incrementally until we get there?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Wow, that's a great story. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today. So for those of you watching, check out our IEP workshop. It's awesome. If you need even the smallest amount of support through your process, I think it will be really helpful and useful to you as a parent, learning to really become the advocate that your child needs, learning how to prepare for the IEP, knowing how to show up in an effective way, working collaboratively with your school, and then measuring the success and outcomes for your child, because every child really is very unique and has unique needs. And so being a part of that and centering your child in it is very important. So check that out. It's on the dragonsnestforgirls.com. And then we also have a download around unique IEP accommodations. And so that's a free download also on the site. And yeah, I think that's all today. So thank you so much, Chelsie.
Thank you for having me.
All right.